Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm started screaming across the bridge of the Starbound. The ship's sensors had picked up something strange in the asteroid field ahead. Lieutenant Amy Davis turned from her station with wide eyes and told Jake that they were getting a distress signal from an unknown vessel. Jake set down his coffee and walked to the main screen. The signal was weak and full of static, but it was definitely artificial. Someone or something was in trouble out there among the floating rocks. Chief Engineer Pete Collins ran the signal through the computer and shook his head. The language was completely unknown to any human database. The crew looked at Jake and waited for orders. First contact with an alien species was supposed to happen under controlled conditions with diplomats and scientists present. Instead, they had found someone calling for help in the middle of nowhere. Jake made his decision quickly. He told Amy to plot a course toward the signal and ordered Pete to prepare the rescue equipment. The Starbound moved carefully through the asteroid field. The rocks here were big enough to crush their ship if they made a mistake. Jake stood behind the pilot as they navigated between the spinning masses of stone and metal. After 20 minutes of careful flying, they found the source of the distress call. The alien ship was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It was twice the size of the Starbound and made from some kind of silver metal that seemed to glow with its own light. But one entire section was dark and torn open. Debris floated around it like a cloud of metal snow. Whatever had happened to this ship had been violent. Jake ordered a full scan of the vessel. The results showed that there were still life signs aboard, but the ship's power was failing fast. In less than 6 hours, the life support would shut down completely. Jake called his senior officers to the briefing room and told them they were going to attempt a rescue. Dr. Susan Hoyt was the first to speak up. She reminded Jake that first contact protocols required them to notify Earth Command and wait for instructions. Colonel Rick Stone agreed and said they had no idea if these aliens were friendly or hostile. They could be walking into a trap. Jake listened to their concerns, but his mind was made up. There were living beings on that ship who would die if they did nothing. He told his crew that they would take every precaution, but they were not going to let people die while they waited for paperwork to be filed. The rescue mission would begin immediately. Pete Collins suited up with Jake and 3 other crew members. They took the shuttle across to the alien vessel and found an airlock that seemed to be malfunctioning. Pete worked his magic with tools and determination while Jake kept watch. After an hour, they managed to get the door open and stepped inside. Corridors of the alien ship were tall and narrow, with curved walls that seemed to flow like water. Emergency lights cast strange shadows as they made their way toward the life signs. The gravity was lighter than Earth normal, and Jake found himself bouncing slightly with each step. They found the survivors in what looked like a command center. There were 5 aliens, and Jake's first thought was that they looked like tall, elegant humans with pale blue skin and large golden eyes. The one who seemed to be in charge was clearly female and wore some kind of uniform covered in symbols that might have been rank insignia. She spoke to them in her own language, and Jake spread his hands to show he meant no harm. He pointed to himself and said his name slowly. The alien woman seemed to understand and pointed to herself. She said something that sounded like Zara. Jake nodded and smiled. First contact had been made. Zara led them through the damaged sections of her ship and showed them the extent of the problems. The reactor was unstable, and the navigation systems were completely destroyed. Jake called Pete over and watched as his engineer studied the alien technology with fascination. After some quick calculations, Pete announced that he might be able to help. The next 3 days were the hardest of Jake's career. The human crew worked around the clock to understand alien technology and jury rig solutions with spare parts from the Starbound. Zara proved to be incredibly intelligent and learned. basic English with surprising speed. She helped translate technical information and showed them how her ship's systems worked. Jake found himself spending more and more time with the alien princess. She asked endless questions about human culture and seemed amazed by their ability to adapt and improvise. When Jake told her about Earth and the billions of humans living there, she stared at him with wonder. Her people thought they were alone in the universe. On the second day, disaster struck. The alien reactor began to overload and threatened to explode. The automatic systems had failed, and someone would have to manually stabilize the core. Jake grabbed a radiation suit and headed for the reactor room, despite Zara's protests. He spent 2 hours in lethal radiation levels, working to balance the alien machinery. Jake finally emerged from the reactor room. He collapsed from radiation. Poisoning. Dr. White worked frantically to save his life, while Zara watched with tears in her golden eyes. She had never seen someone risk their life for strangers the way Jake had done for her and her crew. On the third day, Pete announced that the repairs were complete. The alien ship could make it home safely, and the reactor was stable. Zara thanked the human crew in perfect English and promised that she would never forget their kindness. As her ship prepared to leave, she quietly downloaded detailed information about human capabilities and left. Jake with a small communication device. Jake watched the beautiful silver ship disappear into hyperspace and wondered if he would ever see Princess Zara again. 6 months passed before the communication device that Princess Zara had given Jake finally activated. He was in his quarters reading reports when the small alien gadget began to glow and emit a soft humming sound. Jake picked it up carefully and watched as a holographic image of Zara appeared in the air above the device. She looked different than he remembered. Her golden eyes were filled with worry, and her elegant features showed signs of stress. When she spoke, her English was much better than before, but her voice carried fear. She told Jake that her people were facing a terrible crisis, and she needed his help. Zara explained that an ancient enemy called the Scorath Hive had returned after centuries of silence. These creatures were unlike anything humans had ever encountered. They lived as a collective mind in bioships that could adapt and evolve during battle. The Scorath had new weapons that seemed designed specifically to destroy Valethian technology. Jake listened as Zara described battles where entire Valethian fleets had been wiped out in minutes. The bioweapons released by the Scorath turned their advanced computers against them and made their ships attack each other. Traditional Valethian tactics, based on logic and precision, were useless against an enemy that could think and adapt faster than any individual mind. The worst part was that Zara's father, Emperor Thane, refused to consider asking for help from other species. He believed that the Valethians were superior to all other life forms, and that seeking aid would be a sign of weakness. The royal court supported his position and insisted that they could defeat the Scorath using their own methods. Jake found himself drawn into secret planning sessions with Zara through the communication device. They would talk for hours about military strategy and technology while the rest of his crew slept. Jake shared everything he knew about human warfare, including guerrilla tactics and asymmetric fighting techniques that might confuse the Scorath. Hive Mind. Zara was fascinated by human unpredictability. She told Jake that Valethian military doctrine was based on perfect coordination and flawless execution of complex plans. Every soldier knew exactly what to do in every situation. But humans seemed to thrive on chaos and improvisation. They made decisions that no logical mind could predict. As their conversations continued, Jake began to realize that his feelings for the alien princess were becoming stronger. He found himself looking forward to their late-night communications and thinking about her during his daily duties. Zara seemed to feel the same connection and often asked personal questions about his life and dreams. Jake learned that Zara was the only heir to the Valethian throne and carried enormous pressure to save her people from extinction. She had been trained from childhood to be a perfect leader, but the current crisis made her feel helpless and alone. Jake admired her dedication and strength, even as he worried about the burden she carried. The situation grew worse when Zara reported that the Scoreth had launched a major offensive against her home system. 3 outer worlds had already fallen, and the bioships were moving toward the capital planet. Emperor Thane had ordered the entire Valethian fleet to make a final stand, but early reports suggested they were losing badly. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Without consulting Earth Command or getting official permission, he ordered the Starbound to set course for Valethian space. His crew protested that they would be court-martialed for unauthorized contact with aliens, but Jake told them that some things were more important than regulations. The journey to Valethian space took 2 weeks at maximum speed. During that time, Jake worked with his crew to modify their weapons and tactics for fighting an unknown enemy. They had no idea what Scoreth bioships looked like or how they functioned, but Jake was determined to help Zara any way he could. Arrived in the middle of a massive space battle, dozens of beautiful silver Valethian ships were fighting against horrible organic vessels that looked like giant insects crossed with diseased whales. The bioships pulsed with sickly colors and seemed to be winning through sheer numbers and adaptive tactics. Jake immediately contacted Zara and told her that humanity had arrived to help. She was shocked to see him, but grateful beyond words. The Valethian admiral in charge of the battle refused to coordinate with the primitive human vessel, but Zara overruled him and gave Jake tactical information about Scoreth weaknesses. Starbound was smaller and less advanced than the other ships in the battle, but Jake used that to his advantage. He ordered his crew to attack in ways that made no logical sense. They would charge directly at bioships and veer away at the last. Second, they used their weaker weapons to target seemingly random parts of enemy vessels. The unpredictable human tactics confused the Scoreth hive mind and disrupted their adaptive responses. For the first time in months, Valethian ships began to score significant hits against the bioships. Jake pressed his advantage and ordered the Starbound to ram directly into the largest enemy vessel while his crew fired everything they had. The collision destroyed both ships, but the explosion took out 3 more Scoreth vessels and caused the remaining bioships to retreat in confusion. The Valethian fleet had won its first major victory against the Hive, but the cost was high. Jake and his crew were captured by Valethian forces who saw their presence as an unauthorized invasion. As Jake was placed in restraints, he saw Zara watching from her command ship. Their eyes met across the space between vessels, and he could see the conflict in her golden gaze. She had to choose between her duty to her empire and her feelings for the human who had just saved her world. Jake found himself in a prison cell on the Valethian capital world, staring at walls made of some kind of energy field that hummed softly when he touched it. The charges against him were serious: espionage, unauthorized contact with a sovereign species, and violation of interstellar law. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in this glowing cage. General Kane visited him on the 2nd day of his imprisonment. The Valethian military leader was tall even by his species standards, with scars across his pale blue face that spoke of many battles. He told Jake that humans were a dangerous infection that threatened the purity of Valethian civilization. The general made it clear that he wanted Jake executed as an example to other primitive species, but Jake was not alone in his fight. Princess Zara appeared before the High Council every day to argue for his release and for an alliance with humanity. She showed them recordings of the space battle, where human tactics had saved Valethian lives. She explained how human unpredictability could be the key to defeating the Scorath hive-mind permanently. The High Council was divided. Half of them agreed with General Kane that aliens were inferior beings who should be avoided or conquered. The other half worried that Velithian pride would lead to extinction if they refused all outside help. Emperor Thane listened to both sides, but seemed to lean toward the traditionalist view that his people should stand alone. During his imprisonment, Jake did something that surprised his guards. Instead of sitting in despair, he began to learn everything he could about Velithian culture and language. He asked questions about their history and customs. He studied their military tactics and political systems with the same intensity he had once applied to human problems. The guards were amazed by how quickly Jake absorbed new information. What took most Velithians years to learn, he mastered. Weeks. His human brain seemed designed for rapid adaptation and creative problem-solving. Soon even the guards were coming to him for advice about personal problems and military puzzles. Jake's reputation spread throughout the prison complex and eventually reached the attention of the Velithian Logistics Command. They were struggling with supply line problems that had plagued their military for decades. Traditional solutions based on perfect mathematical models kept failing because real war was messier than equations could predict. When Jake was brought before the logistics officers, he listened to their problems and offered suggestions based on human military experience. He showed them how to build redundancy into their systems and how to plan for unexpected failures. His solutions were crude by Velithian standards, but they worked in practice where elegant theories had failed. Princess Zara began visiting Jake in his cell during the evening hours when fewer guards were present. These meetings were officially about gathering intelligence on human capabilities, but they quickly became something much more personal. Jake could see the tremendous pressure that Zara carried as the only heir to the Velithian throne. She told him about her childhood spent in preparation for leadership and her fear that she was not strong enough to save her people from the Scorath threat. Jake shared his own struggles with command and the weight of making decisions that affected other people's lives. They found comfort in each other's company, despite the impossible circumstances. Their relationship deepened beyond friendship as they talked through the long nights. Zara was fascinated by Jake's emotional openness and his willingness to show vulnerability. Velithian culture discouraged such displays as signs of weakness, but Jake demonstrated that acknowledging fears and doubts could actually make someone stronger. Jake was equally drawn to Zara's intelligence and dedication. She carried herself with royal dignity, but never hesitated to get her hands dirty when her people needed help. He admired her courage in standing up to the High Council and defending humanity, despite the political cost to herself. The peaceful routine of their secret meetings was shattered when Scorath infiltrators launched a surprise attack on the Gun's capital city. The bio-creatures had somehow bypassed all planetary defenses and were spreading through the underground tunnels like a living plague. Panic spread as traditional security measures proved useless against the adaptive enemy. The prison complex was hit early in the attack. Explosions rocked the building, and the energy fields holding Jake captive flickered and died. He could have escaped easily, but instead he ran toward the sounds of battle. His guards tried to stop him, but Jake pushed past them and headed for the command center. The Velithian defenders were paralyzed by the speed and unpredictability of the Scorath assault. Their careful plans had assumed that any attack would follow logical patterns that could be countered with precise responses. But the bio-creatures seemed to act on pure instinct and changed tactics every few minutes. Jake took charge of the defense without waiting for permission. He organized the guards into small mobile teams that could respond quickly to threats anywhere in the complex. He taught them guerrilla tactics that relied on speed and surprise rather than overwhelming firepower. Most importantly, he showed them how to think like their enemy instead of trying to impose order on chaos. The human approach worked. The small teams of defenders began to push back the Scorth infiltrators using hit and run tactics that the bio creatures could not predict or counter. Jake personally led several dangerous missions to rescue trapped civilians and secure critical areas of the complex. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Jake coordinating the final cleanup operations with the same skill that had made him a successful starship captain. Thousands of Valethian lives had been saved by his quick thinking and leadership. Even General Kane had to admit that the humans' actions had been heroic. But Jake's escape from prison and his role in organizing the defense also demonstrated something that worried many Valethians. Humans were not just helpful allies who could be controlled and directed. They were dangerous independent actors who could take charge of any situation and bend it to their will. The question facing the High Council was whether such dangerous allies were worth the risk of losing Valethian supremacy. Princess Zara stood before her father in the royal chamber with her heart pounding but her voice steady. She told Emperor Thane that she had found the solution to save their people from the Scorth threat. The Valethian Empire needed to form a formal alliance with humanity, and she was prepared to seal that alliance by marrying Jake Morrison. The Emperor's golden eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He had expected many things from his daughter, but not this. Marriage to an alien was unthinkable in Valethian culture. Their species had never even considered the possibility of breeding with other life forms. The very idea challenged everything they believed about racial purity and superiority. General Kane was the first to speak against the proposal. He told the Emperor that Princess Zara had clearly been corrupted by prolonged contact with the human prisoner. No rational Valethian would consider such a monstrous union unless their mind had been damaged by alien influence. He demanded that she be examined by the royal physicians and declared unfit to inherit the throne. But Zara stood her ground and presented her case with the same logical precision that her people valued. She showed detailed analysis of every battle against the Scorth and demonstrated how human tactics had been the only effective counter to their adaptive strategies. Traditional Valethian methods had failed completely, while human unpredictability had won. Victories. She explained that the Scorth hive mind could adapt to any logical opponent, but struggled against the chaotic creativity of human thinking. Formal alliance would give the Valethian military access to human tactical doctrines and training methods. More importantly, it would create a new kind of hybrid leadership that combined Valethian precision with human innovation. Emperor Thane listened to his daughter's arguments, but his face remained cold and distant. He told her that even if humans could help win the war, the cost was too high. Valethian civilization was built on the principle that they were the most advanced species in the galaxy. Accepting equals or partners would undermine the very foundation of their society. Queen Lyra had remained silent during the debate, but now she finally spoke. She reminded her husband that their daughter had always shown excellent judgment and had never acted without careful consideration. Perhaps they should examine this proposal more closely before rejecting it outright. The Queen's words carried weight, because she rarely involved herself in political matters. Meanwhile, on Earth, the news of Captain Morrison's situation had created its own political crisis. Admiral Lisa Parker argued before the Colonial Council that humanity had a duty to support their representative, who had risked everything to save alien lives. The alliance he had forged could open up new frontiers for human expansion and technological advancement. Senator Roy Hayes led the opposition faction that wanted to disavow Jake's actions completely. He claimed that one man's unauthorized decisions could drag humanity into an interstellar war they were not prepared to fight. Earth needed at least another century of development before they could deal with advanced alien civilizations as equals. The debate raged for weeks, while Jake remained in limbo on the Valethian capital world. He was no longer a prisoner, but he was not free to leave either. His status as a potential diplomatic liaison gave him some protection, but his future depended entirely on political decisions being made by others. Jake spent this uncertain time learning more about Valethian society and growing closer to Princess Zara. They met openly now that her proposal had made their relationship a matter of public record. Jake was amazed by the complexity of Valethian culture and the tremendous burden that royal duty placed on Zara's shoulders. Zara taught Jake about the ancient traditions that governed her people's lives and the careful balance of power that kept their empire stable. She explained how the marriage of royal heirs was traditionally used to seal alliances between noble houses and strengthen political bonds. Her proposal to marry a human was radical, but it followed established precedent. Jake found himself falling deeper in love with the alien princess as he learned more about her world and her responsibilities. She was brilliant and compassionate, but also strong enough to challenge an entire civilization for what she believed was right. He admired her courage, even as he worried about the price she might pay for defying tradition. The couple decided to proceed with their wedding plans despite the political opposition on both worlds. They arranged a secret ceremony on a neutral space station that operated outside any government's jurisdiction. The wedding would incorporate both human and Valethian traditions to symbolize the unity they hoped to create between their species. Jake's crew from the Starbound served as his groomsmen, while several young Valethian nobles who supported Zara attended as her bridesmaids. The ceremony itself was beautiful and moving as two very different cultures came together in celebration of love and hope for the future. The wedding rings were made from metals native to both Earth and the Valethian homeworld. The vows were spoken in both languages and included promises to build bridges between their peoples, as well as personal commitments to each other. When Jake and Zara kissed to seal their union, they created the first interspecies royal marriage in known history, but their happiness was short-lived. News of the secret wedding leaked to the media on both worlds within hours of the ceremony. Human news networks showed footage of their captain marrying an alien princess, while Valethian broadcasts focused on their princess betraying racial purity for a primitive outsider. The political firestorms that followed were immediate and intense. On Earth, angry crowds demanded that Jake be stripped of his rank and citizenship for unauthorized diplomacy. On the Valethian homeworld, traditional nobles called for Princess Zara to be exiled or executed for treason against her own species. General Kane used the wedding as justification for the military action he had been planning for months. He announced that Princess Zara had been compromised by alien influence and was no longer fit to inherit the throne. He declared martial law and placed Emperor Thane under house arrest while his loyal troops took control of the capital city. Coup happened so quickly that most Valethians did not realize what was occurring until it was over. General Kane appeared on all communication channels to announce that he was acting to preserve Valethian purity and independence. He promised that all human contamination would be purged from their society and their war against the Scorath would be fought using traditional methods. Jake and Zara received word of the coup while they were still on the space station. They realized that their secret wedding had triggered exactly the kind of crisis they had hoped to avoid. Now they faced the terrible possibility that their love had destroyed any chance of the alliance that both their peoples desperately needed to survive. The Valethian throne room had never seen anything like what happened on that historic day. General Kane stood at the center of the great hall, surrounded by his loyal soldiers, while the captured royal family waited under guard. He had seized power to save his people from what he saw as contamination by inferior alien influence. Princess Zara entered the throne room with her head held high and Jake Morrison walking beside her. She wore the traditional robes of a Valethian heir, but Jake was dressed in his human military uniform. The contrast between them was striking, but they moved together with perfect coordination, like partners in an ancient dance. General Kane demanded that Zara renounce her marriage to the human and agree to exile all of Jake's species from Valethian space forever. He told the assembled nobles that this was their last chance to preserve the purity and superiority that made their civilization great. Any further contact with humans would lead to the destruction of everything they had built over thousands of years. Instead of backing down, Zara announced that she and Jake intended to rule the Valethian Empire together as husband and wife. She declared that their union represented the future of their people and the key to victory over the Scoreth threat. The old ways of isolation and assumed superiority had failed, and only adaptation could ensure survival. The nobles in the throne room murmured in shock and outrage at this bold declaration. Many of them supported General Kane's position that aliens were a contamination to be avoided. But others remembered the recent victories that human tactics had made possible and wondered if change might be necessary after all. Queen Lyra had remained silent throughout the political crisis that followed her daughter's wedding announcement. Now she stepped forward and spoke the words that would change everything. She looked directly at Jake and asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. "You brought a human?" she said with genuine curiosity rather than accusation. When Zara confirmed that Jake was indeed her husband, Queen Lyra smiled for the first time in months. She told the assembled court that she had been secretly studying human behavior and culture since Jake's first rescue of her daughter. What she had learned convinced her that humans possessed exactly the qualities that Valethian civilization needed to survive and grow. The queen explained that Valethian society had become stagnant through centuries of assumed superiority. They had stopped learning and adapting because they believed they were already perfect. But the universe was constantly changing, and species that could not evolve would eventually face extinction. Humans represented the gift of adaptability that could revitalize their entire civilization. General Kane interrupted the queen's speech with angry protests. He insisted that Valethian purity was their greatest strength and that mixing with inferior aliens would weaken them beyond recovery. He challenged Jake to prove his worth through the ancient trial of wisdom that had been used to test royal heirs for generations. The trial required the candidate to solve a riddle that had stumped Valethian philosophers for over 1,000 years. The riddle described a logical paradox that seemed to have no solution using traditional Valethian thinking. Hundreds of brilliant minds had tried and failed to find the answer that would unlock the puzzle's meaning. Jake listened carefully as the ancient riddle was recited in formal Valethian. The problem involved a series of interconnected relationships that created contradictions, no matter how they were arranged. Valethian logic demanded that every element fit perfectly into a predetermined pattern, but this puzzle seemed designed to make that impossible. While everyone in the throne room waited, Jake closed his eyes and approached the problem from a completely different angle. Instead of trying to force the elements into a logical structure, he looked for ways that contradictions might actually complement each other. Human thinking allowed for gray areas and creative compromises that pure logic could not accept. After several minutes of silence, Jake opened his eyes and provided his answer. He explained that the riddle was not asking for a single correct solution, but rather demonstrating that complex problems often required multiple approaches working together. The apparent contradictions were actually different aspects of a larger truth that could only be understood by embracing paradox rather than eliminating it. The court scholars were stunned by Jake's interpretation. They had spent centuries trying to find the one perfect answer, when the real solution was to accept that perfection might require imperfection. Jake's human perspective had revealed possibilities that Valethian logic had been blind to for generations. General Kane refused to accept Jake's solution and declared that human thinking was chaotic nonsense that proved their inferiority. He ordered his soldiers to arrest both Jake and Zara for treason against the Valethian state. The general was determined to purge all alien influence from his civilization, even if it meant destroying the royal family. But Jake's tactical training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. He had spent weeks studying the layout of the throne room and identifying potential escape routes and defensive positions. When the soldiers moved to arrest him, Jake was ready with a plan that combined human unpredictability with Valethian precision. The brief battle that followed demonstrated the power of human Valethian cooperation in the most dramatic way possible. Jake used guerrilla tactics to confuse and outmaneuver the general's forces, while Zara coordinated with loyal guards who supported the royal family. Together they turned the throne room into a carefully orchestrated trap for the coup attempt. General Kane was captured within minutes, and his rebellion collapsed as soon as other military units realized that their leader had been defeated by the very human-alien partnership he had tried to destroy. The demonstration of tactical superiority convinced even the most skeptical nobles that cooperation with humans might offer advantages they had never considered. Emperor Fane stepped forward to formally recognize Jake as his son-in-law and heir to the Valethian throne. The marriage between human and Valethian royalty was officially blessed and recognized as the foundation for a new era of cooperation between their species. The first interspecies royal dynasty in galactic history had been established. The story concluded with Jake and Zara working together to forge a comprehensive alliance between Earth and the Valethian Empire. Their unique partnership served as a model for cooperation that other alien species began to study and emulate. The Scoreth threat was eventually defeated using combined human Valethian tactics that neither species could have developed alone. But the final scene revealed that the Scoreth had been only the beginning of the challenges that awaited them. Among the stars, a galaxy contained dangers and opportunities that would require the combined wisdom, strength, and adaptability of many different species working together as equals in the vast adventure of space exploration.